Well, money makes the world go round, people say. Is it really true? I think in some ways it is true, isn't it? There's a sense in which some form of currency, it doesn't necessarily have to be little coins, it could be anything. If there was no such thing as coinage and notes, we'd still be purchasing and doing things using, do you want 5 of my turnips and I'll take 6 of your carrots or whatever. We would find some way of trading in skills or time or something. There's a sense in which some kind of bartering and currency in that way is necessary in the way that the world works. However, it's a mistake when we think that money is what the world's all about. And it's very easy to think that that's the case because we see it all around us, don't we? We think that because money can do so much and is practically how many things operate, that our lives can very easily become all about having more and more of this thing. There was a time when people argued that greed was indeed good, particularly in the 80s and then following on up to the time really where the big market crash happened a few years ago, and maybe still. Ivan Boesky was a classic example of this, in a Wall Street wizard who basically said at a big conference once upon a time, he said, "I think greed can be healthy. You can be greedy and still feel good about yourself." And everybody gave him a standing ovation. They thought he was great. And then he had a t-shirt, and his favourite t-shirt had this slogan, "He who owns the most when he dies wins." And he was, well, a big spokesman for that era. He actually ended up being incited for insider trading and being given 3.5 years in prison, along with a $100 million fine, which is pretty hefty. But he was an example, the ultimate kind of extreme maybe example of the kind of person who thinks that life is all about money. Ecclesiastes, in the book of the Bible we've been looking at, looks at the whole issue of money, and we thought a little bit previously about how money and envy can lead to oppression, and he carries on with that kind of idea, but he makes some big points about money. He says, first of all, money can't bring happiness. Remember that money can't bring happiness. It's not going to solve all my problems. In fact, actually, money brings its own problems. And he gives some case studies in chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes. In verse 13 to 17, he talks about the person who saves obsessively. He talks about the person who loses money in a bad venture. And then he talks about the kind of person who loses everything at death, which is, of course, all of us. People say, don't they, how much did so-and-so leave when he died? And the answer is always everything. He left it all. That's how it always works. So we remember money cannot bring ultimate happiness, and it's foolish to think it can. So therefore, secondly, what he says is this: remember that everything you have is a gift from God. Everything you have is a gift. And again, a couple of case studies to show how important it is, because he gives a contrast with a person, this is in verses 1 to 6 of chapter 6, that a person who has money, possessions and fame, but they can't enjoy them. And likewise, a person who has a big family and long life, but can't enjoy them. He's saying what we need to be doing is remembering that everything is a gift, and so enjoying the things that God has given us, whatever they may be, learning to be content. In the New Testament, when the Apostle Paul is writing to some Christians, and particularly writing to Timothy, but others around him as well, he says this at the end of 1 Timothy in chapter 6. He says, "True godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." And he goes on to say, "Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment." And that's the teaching of Jesus too, as he tells us not to trust in wealth, but to recognise we can't serve two masters. We can't serve and live both for God and money, and yet many of us try. His advice is, understand here, understand it's a gift, understand it in its right place, in its right way, and live wisely, live with God as the priority.